HD3 Detroit,
KJAQ,
HD3 Seattle,
WBMX,
HD3 Boston, and on AOL Radio and Yahoo Launchcast. Psychic Radio is now CBS Radio's The Sky. Back to Behind the Paranormal with Paul and Ben Eno. Call now 248-545-SOUL. New skyradio.com. Believe.
When, if ever, will mainstream science accept the paranormal as legitimate? What will it take to make them do so? Should we even care?
Hey there, and welcome to the 169th edition of Behind the Paranormal with Paul and Ben Eno. I'm Ben, and those questions you just heard were from my co-host and partner in the paranormal, my dad.
Boy, we're getting up toward 200 there. Every once in a while, Ben and I like to forego a guest and address some aspect of the paranormal that nobody else seems to be addressing.
Since everyone we've talked to says they want to hear us talk.
Well, not everyone, but
most,
yeah, we had
most people.
We were out at a public event yesterday, and a lot of listeners who came up to introduce themselves said they'd like to hear us
speak.
Yeah, speak more than just have guests. So, anyway, so we plan to do that tonight anyway. Anyway, you like to address things that other people don't seem to be addressing, and that can range from distant nooks and crannies of the paranormal, like Lizard Man and Puckwudgies, to major topics like the nature of ghosts or our relationship with science, because we feel that most people have unsupported assumptions, ask the wrong questions, and just generally don't get it.
Yeah, well, that's the problem with people in general. They don't seem to understand the questions, never mind the answers.
Exactly.
So today we're going to talk about paranormal and science.
But first, before we do that, we wanted to acknowledge our good friend Steve Fermani, head of New England MUFON, Mutual UFO Network, all their members, and the good people of the town of Exeter, New Hampshire, who showed us such hospitality when we turned up yesterday to cover their second annual UFO festival. We had a great location in the back of the town hall. It was hot, but hey, this place is old, doesn't have AC. The lectures took place there, and we were setting up a podcast booth. Only problem is nothing worked.
Yes.
But it wasn't their fault.
It's not the first time.
No. Story of our lives.
Yeah.
But we did happen to have a handheld recorder, and we managed to get some interviews, and we're going to put together a show, part of a show anyway, on that.
Yes.
Many listeners came forward to introduce themselves and have me sign their books if they had them, and we interviewed several of our show's favorite guests who were speakers there. Included Phil Imbrogno, Stan Friedman, Peter Robbins, and, of course, Steve Fermani himself. Our good friend and another regular guest, Shane Searway from TrueGhost.com, was there with his family. He lives in New Hampshire, and helped us set up, and it was great to see him as well. We're going to have him on. So
yeah, since we don't see him very often because he lives in a good distance away.
He lives, I don't know, hour and a half into Rhode Islanders. That is a very daunting...
It's ungodly. Anyway, so Exeter being the place where the first alien abduction widely covered in the press took place in 1961, Betty and Barney Hill. And some people could you call it the Roswell of New England?
I would like to do that. Yeah, I think as a matter of fact that this festival, one of the purposes of it is to kind of make Exeter a Roswell-like attraction in the East.
Yes.
And they plan to have this is the second festival, and it was well attended. It was very well organized, I thought. The town is very quaint and beautiful, and
food was very good.
Yeah, food was good. Yeah, it was a nice day. Nice day. Weather was nice. So anyway, the Exeter UFO Festival. We'll be playing those interviews over upcoming shows, and I'm thinking of putting together a special podcast, especially interviews we had with Stan Friedman and Phil Imbrogno, who's working on some really exciting stuff regarding the multiverse. So watch for that, and keep your eye on www.exeterufofestival.com and plan to meet us there next year.
All right, so, Father, sometimes you have strong opinions. And,
sometimes?
Well, no, all the time.
Okay.
And I know you really mean it when you say our show's official motto, which is everything we know is wrong, except it's not really ours to take because...
Well, it's public domain.
All right, so It's not really copyrighted, so let's just throw it out there. We didn't come up with this. So what's wrong with science?
Well, the answer to that, I suppose, Ben, is our show's unofficial motto, which is, it's not good enough. All right? Now, I don't know, we have a lot of guests on the show who are particularly ghost hunters, who are all, they all seem very sincere, but they're kind of running around trying to prove things to science, with some exceptions. UFO people and cryptozoological people, they're used to having duels with science. And they realize the difficulties involved in getting anything proven and all this. But that's particularly the ghost hunters, I suppose, we're talking to tonight. It's a term I don't like. I think it's rather silly, and it trivializes something that's far deeper and far more important than just hunting ghosts in the sense of the word that some people use. Anyway, I get the impression a lot of these people have learned what they know by reading pop ghost hunting books by other people who don't know anything. All right. And I don't mean to be cynical on that, but there are a lot of people who read the actual parapsychological literature, maybe belong to the American Society for Psychical Research and actually read the journal, this sort of thing. But I get the impression that a lot of ghost hunters they do not know the history of the field. And people in the history of the field will tell them that people have been trying to prove stuff to modern science, to mainstream science, since at least 1880 in the modern world. The ASPR, the American Society for Psychical Research, which I belonged to for 30 years, has been a center of that, and it started in the 1880s when a group of people in the new science of psychology came together and tried to regularize the whole phenomenon of mediums and seances that was going on in the spiritualism field, okay? And they say, obviously, something is happening here with the human mind. What is it? What does it mean? And, of course, how can science explain it? Well, they've been trying to kind of do that ever since. I was honored to know Louisa Rhine, Dr. J.B. Rhine's wife, who did her own especially important work regarding ESP in children and older people, senior citizens, and they did a lot of work in this field. And it really, data piled up, all sorts of things were accumulated as far as information was concerned, but it ended up kind of with people throwing up their hands and mainstream science saying, well, there's too much statistical unreliability here. You really can't prove this. You can't duplicate that in a laboratory. And, of course, that's one of the big things with science. So it never really has gotten anywhere. Now, people in the ASPR are very interested in things like transpersonal psychology, the psychology of spiritual experiences and experiences that go beyond what can be physically explained with the mind. And this sort of thing. I think that's good. But still, it's still plodding along, and there's still, I get the sense that there's still an underlying current of sweating and straining to make the square peg fit the round hole and to discover some kind of scientific laws that govern the paranormal. So, I mean, to me, it's like arguing about the anatomy of unicorns and the culture of leprechauns, because it's never going to happen, in my personal opinion. Again, I'm not a scientist. It's just, after 40 years of being in the trenches, that's my impression. So anyway, I don't think science is good enough to explain the paranormal. And I think that motto is right. Everything you know is wrong, because religion isn't good enough to explain it. Spiritualism isn't good enough to explain it. Certainly not pop ghost hunting or EVPs, electronic voice phenomena, and certainly not science.
Although it may be interesting, it doesn't really...
Yeah, it could be a start.
Yes. So there are an awful lot of people out there trying to explain the paranormal with those things. So why isn't it good enough?
Well, it's not good enough because it's not big enough. Explaining the paranormal is if you explain the paranormal, you explain the multiverse, all of reality, all the whys of human existence, and our ultimate destiny. That's my absolutely concerted opinion. But to do that, you have to be able to see the big picture. You have to be able to see the whole picture. And people like us, brought up in Western civilization, and here's the key to this whole thought, have a very, very hard time seeing the big picture. And that's because our whole society and its educational system, which you and I, Ben, talk about all the time, the whole thing trains us not to see the big picture. We're trained to think that we can understand things by taking them apart. And in fact, ancient Eastern thinkers and so-called primitive societies knew that you understand things by putting them together. Good boy.
You're
welcome. Putting it all together into a unified picture of reality. But you know that better than anybody. You hang out with me. You think like Lao Tse, and you're just starting college in the USA. What do you?
What am I doing? Well,
I mean, what are you thinking here?
What am I thinking?
Yeah.
I think I don't really think like Lao Tse. I'm just as Western as everybody else, but I try to think like him. If I could think like him, I'd be the happiest man in the world.
Yeah. The person whose philosophy started the Taoism, if you don't know who Lao Tse is.
Well, actually, he didn't start it. He was one of the most popular writers, one of the first Taoist writers. Everyone accredits him with being the starter of it, but he was just one of the first writers. It's been around for a while.
I stand corrected. So in any case, this has led to specialization, over-specialization, in my opinion. People know only about one or two things and can't see the big picture. Now, I guess you have to look back to those dear old Greek philosophers, Plato and especially Aristotle. I mean, these guys really developed the idea of what we call today deductive reasoning. I don't mean this to be a philosophy class.
I remember learning about that when I was in middle school.
Oh, yeah, it's the basis of all the thinking. In other words, you use your five senses and the logic that's based on them to work things out. And here's where all the assumptions I'm always griping about started to come in. Deductive reasoning assumes that our five physical senses, sight, hearing, touch, taste, and smell, truly give us an accurate picture of the world. We have no way of being certain of that. We really don't. And without that, all logic falls apart. Now, here's an example. Now, the basis of Western thought is captured in a thing called the syllogism, one of the first things you learn in philosophy. It's a line of logical thought that leads to a logical conclusion. Every student of philosophy learns this. Now, we're almost coming up on break here, but here's the classic syllogism. All men are mortal. Socrates is a man. Therefore, Socrates is mortal. Hey, what's the problem with that, right? However, if our five senses aren't accurate because there's more to reality than they can perceive, then it all falls apart. After 40 years of ghost research, I've seen no evidence whatsoever that people are mortal. From what you and I have seen in our initial travels, Ben, around the multiverse, people can't die.
Yeah.
Because they're alive in every possible parallel
Or
universe.
can't die in the sense that we're talking about, because there's all sorts of definitions of you cannot die.
Okay, well, speaking deathlessly, we're going to take a break, and we'll be right back on Behind the Paranormal with Paul and Ben Eno, where we're talking about science and the paranormal. Stay with us.
CBS Radio's The New Sky. NewSkyRadio.com. Across the Veil with April Lugo.
Join April Lugo each Tuesday night at 7 for Across the Veil. Across the Veil is a show that promises to be a unique experience as April connects and communicates with those who are across the veil. April receives guidance and wisdom from the ancients, angels, masters, teachers, and guides, as well as hearing messages from those who have preceded us across the veil, family, friends, and loved ones alike. The program is an excellent opportunity for you to hear from those who are across the veil. April will be answering questions and giving insight. That's the main reason for the program. Across the Veil at 7 Tuesday on The Sky.
Look up to the sky. Psychic Radio is now CBS Radio's The Sky. Reach out, NewSkyRadio.com.
Where is the moment we need it the most? You kick up the leaves and the magic is lost. Tell me your blue skies fade to gray. Tell me your passion's gone away. And I don't need no carrying on. You stand in the line just to hit a new low. You're faking a smile with the coffee to go. And tell me your life's been way offline. You fall into pieces every time. And I don't need no carrying on. 'Cause you had a bad day. You take it one down. You sing a sad song just to turn it around. You say you don't know. You tell me don't lie. You work at a smile and you go for a ride. You had a bad day. The camera don't lie. You're coming back down and you really don't mind. You had a bad day. 'cause you had a bad day. You're taking one down. You sing a sad song just to turn it around. You say you don't know. You tell me don't lie. You work at a smile and you go for a ride. You had a bad day. You see what you like. And how does it feel? One more time. You had a bad day. You had a bad day.
Psychic Radio is now CBS Radio's The Sky. Back to Behind the Paranormal with Paul and Ben Eno. Call now 248-545-SOUL. New skyradio.com.
Well, welcome back. And Ben and I tonight are talking about how Westerners think. I'm not talking about people from Arizona or California necessarily, but anybody from the Western mindset, European, American, Greek even, and how it affects our interpretation of the paranormal and its relationship to science. Nice simple topic today. But it all falls apart so easily. We're talking about the syllogism, something you learn in philosophy. And I'll say it again, all men are mortal. Socrates is a man, therefore Socrates is mortal. But again, if our five senses aren't accurate, which we have no indication that they are, because there's more to reality than they can perceive, then it all falls apart. As for good old Socrates, who was Plato's teacher, by the way, we have no idea whether he's really a man in a physical sense. There's been much philosophical speculation, I should say, that life is but a dream. Row your boat.
It's like that song, Life is But a Dream.
Yeah, exactly. Lots of cats and dogs think they're people. I even had a horse once who thought he was a dog. Maybe the real Socrates was an armadillo. I mean, we don't know. Now, this whole way of thinking of this deductive reasoning we were talking about created a whole materialist worldview. It didn't happen overnight, but very slowly. It became the idea that we base everything on matter and the relationship between other matter. That's how we know anything. Our five senses take it all in, and we put together a world based on that. But again, especially when you've dealt with the paranormal in any deep way, it's not good enough. Religion became less important because it wasn't material, generally. And meditation, prayer, philosophical thinking itself became very materialistically oriented, and all our science began to grow from that, starting in the ancient world. But despite all these problems with this kind of thinking, we cling, probably for security in an unimaginably insecure world, to the warm, fuzzy idea that our senses don't lie and that the logic based on them is solid. That's a very comforting thought. It means we have a certain amount of control.
Oh, but we don't.
Zero. But all our Western society, religion, science, and therefore paranormal research are based without question today on Socrates as a man. And we scratch our heads about why it doesn't really answer the questions, of why it ultimately gets us nowhere except to spiritual and moral devastation.
So what about quantum physics?
Okay, well, that's one area of science where there's a little bit of hope. Now, in the late 70s, I was asking these very questions, running into paranormal cases that just didn't add up, for which science had no real answer, religion had no real answer, and neither did pop paranormal research at the time, or even parapsychology. Couldn't answer the questions. Why is this entity apparently like wearing clothes, going about his day in some other world? Why is there a ghost of a truck driving down the road? Why were there ghosts of ox carts and stuff in certain cases? This, et cetera, et cetera. Went on and on and on. The famous case in 1979 of the young girl who was a student at the University of Connecticut. I've mentioned this case many times, but was at the same time haunting a house in coastal Maine, 120 miles away. None of this stuff was good enough to answer these questions. All right. So the signs of hope came in the science of quantum mechanics, because people started writing popular books about that. In the well, mid-70s, okay? And certainly Frioff Kopra, Amit Goswami, very well-known physicists who are also mystics, and certainly in the modern times, Fred Allen Wolf, who has been a guest on our show, I'm pleased to say, and sort of, to a point, agreed with our point of view that we're not dealing with anything that traditional science can't explain, but the quantum physics begins to explain multiple worlds, multiple universes. Theologically, an explosion of divine love that created more than one world, and they interact, and we think that we're seeing spirits. So that's only the beginning. So science can be a beginning to an answer if it's open-minded enough. And lots of scientists, I'm very happy to say, are open-minded. We saw one of them yesterday, and that's two of them yesterday, Phil Imbrogno, our good friend, who was doing an amazing work. And I'm going to play, not right now, but at some point very soon, the interview that I did with him. And he's talking about a new form of machine that he has that apparently can reach across portals into other dimensions and other worlds. Not quite the same thing. Yeah, but into parallel worlds. And which is what Ben and I are going to be trying to do once our television show gets going. And I don't know, we may be coordinating a bit with Phil. I'm not sure yet. But Phil is a real scientist who is open-minded and is getting beyond traditional deductive reasoning in that sense. But still, we have a lot of scientists on the show who they still can't get out of that way of thinking. I don't want to name any because I respect all of them. But the problem is, as I said before, specialization. Now, professionally speaking, I'm a journalist. I worked in newspapers of 30 years, and now we're on the radio here, and I like to think that and I still work in not daily journalism, but I'm still an active journalist in a part-time basis in Rhode Island. But the show, I like to think, is sort of paranormal journalism. You know, we do interviews, we look behind the scenes, we try and find answers that are maybe kind of unique, and I like to think that I'm carrying on with journalism. But I've addressed students at journalism schools on journalism in general, and particularly when I was editor of a small-town newspaper. And they all they know about is journalism. We are not liberally educated anymore, and I don't mean educated in political correctness or how to be socialist or anything. I'm talking about, liberal education in the sense of learning about many different things. Our whole system now seems to be based on specialization, although there are shining lights, and many of the primary schools are, in some areas, are starting to get back to learning about many different things. When I was in my master's degree program at Trinity College in Hartford, we learned about many different things on the graduate level. I studied philosophy, law, and it was just wonderful because I'm interested in everything. So I think that that's an advantage in simply thinking about the paranormal, and let alone being a journalist, because you know about many different things. But so many journalists today have never served in the military, they've never been in politics, they've never done anything except journalism. So therefore, they don't know much about it, and they have tremendous influence in communities. And I used to, what?
Just have a question.
Yeah. Oh, sure, please.
Great. So check this out. So if all these people are so wrong, how do they get to the right? Like, what should people do to get to the right?
I get the impression that people like Phil and Brogno and our friends in the scientific community who think more openly have let themselves have, maybe should I call it spiritual experiences, or at least experiences that take them outside of the cocoon of comfortable thinking. Okay, maybe we coined one there, the cocoon of comfortable thinking. The idea that, the idea that, okay, the world is predictable and controllable by deductive reasoning. Okay, and I think that once they kind of get beyond that and realize that there's a whole bigger world out there, bigger multiverse, then maybe they can kind of get beyond that and realize that our five senses are not good enough. You have to pay attention to, shall we call it, psychic power.
You have to pay attention to what's around you.
Pay attention to what's around you, and even what's around you that you can't detect with your five senses. Something as simple as that.
Yes.
Maybe becoming more childlike. You know what? Even Jesus said that. He said, "Unless you be like a little child, you can't enter the kingdom of heaven." Maybe, and he didn't mean being childish. he meant be childlike. And that's exactly what it says in the Greek. I'm always yelling, you got to read it in the original in order to get the true meaning. And I think what he was talking about was, unless you get out of your own way, don't let them train you to be, a stiff, so to speak. Remain confident in what is constructive about your childlike feelings and what you believe you are a child, and then you can pass through the portal to the real world, so to speak.
Yes.
And I don't know if that's a really good way to describe it, but I think these people have had this experience and have gotten beyond it. And maybe these are the ones who will transform science and help to open it up more. So I think I'd like to think that's happening. So,
well, that answers my question. You can go back to what you were talking about.
Okay. Well, no, I just wanted to get through that subject. I think that's essentially it. The problem is how we think, and I guess the message is don't be afraid to think for yourself. If you want to go on, if you're a ghost hunter or any sort of researcher who wants to prove, go ahead. But pay attention to what other groups are doing. Check the history of the field, and try not to reinvent the wheel, because again, I think it all comes down to faith. No matter what you think you can prove, it all comes down to faith. And one of the things, one of my jingles or slogans, which I think is very true, is that for the believer, no proof is required. For the unbeliever, no proof is ever enough. So there's nothing, and I think the great thinkers of parapsychology early on found this out, that no matter what you think you have for data and information, you're going to present it to modern science, and if they don't want to believe it, they're not going to believe it. It's as simple as that.
Yeah.
Now, you might say, well, okay, what about math? How can you argue with mathematics? Well, and I've even had people on the show, well, Paul, you're talking about science is not good enough and math. Well, I mean, 2 and 2 will always be 4. Well, I've got news for you. 2 and 2 is not always 4.
2 and 2 can be 5.
Well, in the base 2 system, 2 and 2 is 2. I mean, so it depends on your point of view and what system you're using. Everything is up for discussion. Everything is up for grabs. And you say, well, religion isn't good enough. Well, no. I mean, religion is like science, is a start. As a matter of fact, I always say, what's the problem between science and religion? It's a false construct, because science and religion have the same mother. And who was that mother? The paranormal. Had there been nothing to explain, had there been no mysteries, had there been no fear among our remote ancestors, then would religion or the science have been necessary? But there is a quest in us to get to the truth, to find out what is happening, why, and that's the basis of paranormal interest, and certainly of science and religion. I think that's very much very important. So our thinking essentially is too narrow, because we seem to want to placate science as if it's some sort of God. Well, it's not God, and it doesn't need to be appeased. And let me give you here's an example. You can't forget that scientists, wonderful and sincere as many of them are very highly thought of generally in society, next to doctors or clergy, or at least used to be highly thought of. We often think of them as selfless beings who are in lab coats working in basements or laboratories on things that will help humanity. And I think that in some cases that is still the case, maybe more so in olden times, I don't know. But don't forget that it's all about bucks. I hate to be cynical about that, but I think that's true. And science doesn't believe in the paranormal unless there's money to be made. For example, there was a project which, believe it or not, was called Project Stargate. It went on probably it was going on in the early and late 1970s, and the government of the United States spent at least $20 million on a program to perfect paranormal weapons and paranormal warfare. We have to take a break now, but we'll get right back to that. We'll find out how science responded to that and what it did. Stay with us. Behind the Paranormal with Paul and Ben Eno. Be right back.
CBS Radio's The New Sky. NewSkyRadio.com. This is the Lisa J. Smith Show.
Listen to Lisa J now at 3 o'clock Eastern. This is Lisa J. Smith, and I am here to give you messages from Spirit. Give us a call so I can connect with you.
Look up to the sky. Psychic Radio is now CBS Radio's The Sky. Reach out, NewSkyRadio.com.
She doesn't own a dress. Her hair is always a mess. If you catch her stealing, she won't confess. She's beautiful. Smokes a pack a day. You can wait, that's me. But anyway, she doesn't care a thing about that. Hey, she thinks I'm beautiful. Meet Virginia. She never compromises, loves babies and surprises, wears high heels when she exercises. Ain't that beautiful? Meet Virginia. Well, she wants to be the queen, and she thinks about her scene. Pulls her hair back as she screams. I really want to be the queen. Daddy wrestles alligators. Mama works on carburetors. My brother is a fine mediator for the president. Well, here she is again on the phone, just like me, ain't to be alone. We just like to sit at home and rip on the president. Meet Virginia. Well, she wants to live her life, and she thinks about her life. Pulls her hair back as she screams. I don't really want to live this life. Well, she wants to be the queen, and she thinks about her scenes. Well, she wants to live her life, and she thinks about her life. Pulls her hair back as she screams. I don't really want to be the queen. I don't really want to be the queen. I don't really want to be the queen.
Psychic Radio is now CBS Radio's The Sky. Back to Behind the Paranormal with Paul and Ben Eno. Call now 248-545-SOUL. NewSkyRadio.com. Believe.
Hello, and we're back, and we're talking this evening about science and the paranormal. And my personal opinion, after 40 years of working in the paranormal, that why bother trying to prove anything to modern science? We are talking about scientists who are human too, and how bucks really is the bottom line in science today, and that these people are not necessarily selfless servants of humanity. Again, not to denigrate, but I mean, you have to consider these things. And as I said, mainstream science doesn't believe in the paranormal unless there's money to be made. We're talking about Project Stargate, which went on from about 1970 to 1995, and there were plenty of other projects as well. And the American military poured at least $20 million into this Stargate project to pin down and perfect elements of paranormal warfare. And this was a response to a similar Soviet program. Actually, there were several similar Soviet programs. And the goal was to recruit and train psychics to discern enemy plans and intentions, to locate spies and weapons by remote viewing, and even to create fires, explosions, and weather disturbances, and other forms of clandestine attack from a distance. I don't know. All I can think of is dear old Winston Zeddemore in the film Ghostbusters from 1984 when he said, "If there's a steady paycheck in it, I'll believe anything you say." But anyway, I understand that the Pentagon has had some success in these experiments and that they're still going on, although I'm the last person they tell about it. And I believe that if any government really has developed military applications for the paranormalists, leaders and scientists may be vividly aware of the nature of reality as we talk about it on this show, i.e. the multiverse. So you can... So my opinion here, again, is I don't think that when you work in the paranormal, you need to particularly bother with trying to prove anything to science. Science itself has its problems, even if we take the scientists out of the equation. Many things that were considered to be laws of math, even, were later declared not to be correct. Kepler's laws of planetary motion, for example, I believe there are 3 of them. Laws of planetary motion. The laws seem to be correct, but the math behind them has been found to be wrong. So again, this is it's not perfect. It's based on human failings, and there are plenty of chances for mistakes. So science is not a god. I don't bother with it unless it really does enhance what I'm trying to do. And again, I got over it a long time ago. Skeptics are another thing that we're concerned with as paranormal investigators. You know, I very rarely tangle with skeptics because I guess they just don't bother to come to my lectures and stuff. But sometimes they'll be listening to the show and they'll send in emails, or I will be lecturing and one will stand up. And I find, again, that very often the super skeptics, it's good to be skeptical. Obviously, you have to measure things as much as you can and make judgments according to common sense. All right. Especially when you're working in a case with something as slippery as a possible ghost phenomena going on. But a skeptic will stand up and say, well, this, and this. And I get the impression that they are afraid of not believing. Or rather, I should say afraid of believing, because I think some of these people need not to believe. I call them skepticemics. It's a very comfortable world when we think that we are in charge. It's very comfortable to think that there are neat scientific laws that can explain who we are, why we're here, how everything works. And as a matter of fact, the original idea from the Enlightenment of scientific research was to be able to discover, again, take things apart rather than put them together. And that's what destroyed our thinking as human beings and destroyed society. But they thought if they took it apart, studied it, they could understand the whole, and they could predict everything that was going to happen in the universe, like as if it was some kind of clock. And they began to treat God as if he was some kind of clock. And it just never worked. And it just created a mess philosophically, theologically, and scientifically. So, again, that seems to be what we've been facing. So that's my opinion, and I think we need to each consider our own position when it comes to that. Maybe I'm wrong. A lot of people in the paranormal are working specifically to try and make things scientifically viable in their work. I respect that. I think they're wasting their time, but that's my opinion. So let's get into a couple of emails here. This one is particularly relevant. This is from Harry Tillinghast. Well, that's a good old Rhode Island name. Harry is from Detroit. And Harry says, I'm a big fan of the show, and I'm into philosophy. Paul, you must be related to David Hume. David Hume, let me just give it a side. David Hume was a British philosopher who doubted everything. He was the king of the super skeptics. And it's ironic that I criticize super skeptics because I'm the one who just told you can't know anything for sure. Well, that's what Hume said. But, I think I say it in a way that leaves rays of hope, that it's possible to learn simply by, even for yourself. Anyway, the letter goes on. When it comes to your skepticism about our knowledge of things, I do have a bone to pick. How can you doubt the evidence of mathematics, which works hand in hand with science? Eastern thinking or Western thinking, math is always the same. Well, I think I probably just answered that question, Harry. Kepler's law, again, it was found to be based on faulty mathematics. We're talking about physics. Again, quantum physics have called into question the whole notion of causality. One of the basics of Western thinking was, okay, I drop a cup and it breaks. Well, in the world of the multiverse and in quantum mechanics, effects can take place after the causes that before the causes that supposedly caused them. Time doesn't mean anything. And these are things that I think we need to consider. Even math, and as I say, 2 + 2 does not always equal 4, literally speaking, depending on what base system you're using, mathematical system. So I don't know if that answers your question, but I think that your faith in science and math is touching, but is not valid. Okay, here's a rather long. That's the only one who asked a question about that issue of science, so maybe people agree with me. I don't know. So this is from Denise Kay in Spokane, Washington. And Denise writes an interesting letter about a ghost.
Great. So she says here that we listen to you on KJAQ, and you are the only show I know of that uses the paranormal to inspire people. With you two, it's not always death, gloomy, and scary experiences. I like that. So I thought I share. I guess she meant to put thought I'd share one of my own experiences. I am 60 years and married. Our children are grown and flown, as they say. But my 90-year-old mother lived with us for 2 years until she died last year. Her heart was very bad, and in her final year, she had many chest pains at night, and we had to keep giving her nitro and painkillers. We should have put her in a nursing home, but I just couldn't do it. During the last month, during her last month, we would hear footsteps running along the hallway toward her room. It turned out that this was happening when night pains would come to my mother. We would find her holding hands with somebody we couldn't see, and once or twice she said Marty. Marty was her brother who died when he was 10, but the running footsteps sounded like a grown-up. This happened almost every night until my mother died peacefully. Amazingly, when this happened, she didn't seem like she needed any pills. Maybe you can explain this, but we couldn't. Thanks again for the great show.
Okay, thank you, Ben. That's a beautiful. That's a beautiful story, and it reminds me of your grandmother, my mother. Yes. Anyway, we're going to take a break now, and I'm going to answer this when we come back and say what I can say about it. Stay with us Behind the Paranormal with Paul and Ben Eno on CBS New Sky Radio, newskyradio.com. Be right back.
Psychic Radio, psychiconair.com. The wake-up call with Ellen Tom.
But so you're the first kid on the block, and you can prove it. Because there's similar prototypes, but nothing quite as good as yours. Yes. Yours has more than one application.
Yes, my God, you're brilliant.
Hi, it's Tom Force. Reverend L. Newman and I are here Monday nights, 7 till 9, prime time, Eastern time in the United States, with Wake Up Call on Psychic Radio.
Psychic Radio. We know you're listening. Life is a journey. Let us be your guide. Reach out on the net now, psychiconair.com.
Look for Psychic Radio on your AOL radio player.
Places I go make me feel tongue-tied, and I can see how people look down there on the inside. Here's where the story ends. People I see wearing me, sharing my good side. And I can see how people look down
Radio is now CBS Radio's The Sky. Back to Behind the Paranormal with Paul and Ben Eno. Call now 248-545-SOUL. New skyradio.com.
Well, welcome back. And we just read a rather beautiful note from Denise Kay in Spokane, Washington. And she was, just to sum up, just telling us about her elderly mother, who was 90 years old and having serious chest pains at night, living with them. And they would hear footsteps of someone running down the hallway toward this woman's room, and the woman would be comforted by whoever this was. And the writer happens to mention that she herself had a brother, would have been this woman's son, who died at the age of 10. And when he would go in, and if this is who this was, and hold her hand, they would see her holding hands with someone, and she wouldn't need the pills. And this happened, I guess, in the final month before she did pass away. So I think this is a story similar to many we have heard before, Denise, and it's utterly beautiful. I think it's the whole point of why we work in the paranormal. We don't work in the paranormal, Ben and me, to prove that it exists or to somehow make money. Which, heaven knows, we don't make any money from this, really.
No.
And this business, but what we are trying to do is use the paranormal to help us understand the universe, and most of all, by doing that, to bring people together. To realize that love is, and again, I'm not the touchy-feely guy here, but I mean, love is where it's at, as we used to say. It is the glue that holds us together across the boundaries of worlds. People are always writing to me, how do I contact my beloved uncle who died, or my beloved mother? So you don't need to. And with all due respect to our neighbors here on the CBS New Sky, you don't need psychics and mediums if you know what you're doing. All you have to do is just be there. Be quiet. You have to shut up, essentially. Let whatever's there teach you. You'll know, I think, in your heart whether it's some sort of lying spirit or not, if it's a spirit at all. But generally, if your loved ones don't have something more important to do in the lives to which their consciousness has gone after they shed the leaf from the tree here, so to speak, then that love is there. And we've even seen love crossing the boundaries between total strangers in one world and another, between alien and human, between distant, remote ancestors, and those who are here with us in our own conscious world. Remember, we're passing through these worlds all the time. I think this is just an example, Denise's note here, of a beautiful, beautiful love story. And it's interesting, I know, that the boy, if this is who this is, or was, died at the age of 10, they heard adult footsteps running toward this room. And if it was Marty, the boy, then he, in whatever world he was living now, body and spirit and everything, he'd grown up. It's a world in which he never died. But it's a world in which he's aware of his loved ones and his blood, and he acted on that love and helped take care of his mother. I think it's an absolutely beautiful story. I think it's as real as it gets. It's not sappy or, maudlin or melancholy. I think it's just a beautiful story about what reality really is. All this cruelty and pain and death we see around us is not natural. It is not for us, and we can overcome it, and we do it through the paranormal. Strange thought, but absolutely true.
Yes.
More about that some other time, or else read my books, one or the other. All right. Here's an interesting one. This is from, does not want to use his name, or her name. I'll just say Alabama. Okay, somewhere in Alabama. I went missing for 3 days. Okay.
All right, so even though we don't have a lot of time left, let's see if we can get this in at least. So after work on Sunday, November 4th, 1979, about 5 p.m. when I went to my car, I went missing. I was gone until about midday the following Wednesday, November 7th. My coworker said that my car remained in the parking lot until Monday, but I think she said it was gone on Tuesday. I was not in the car. I can't remember. I ended up at our lake house on Wednesday in my car and in the same clothes. I have absolutely no memory of where I was, but I was not abused in any way, no sign of it at least. Where could I possibly have been? Did I step into another universe? Please make up a name for me, and don't say where I live. People around here are not nice about things like this.
No, I hear you on that. Okay. Well, it sounds as though, unless this were some sort of, psychotic experience or something totally within your mind, something I have great doubts about, by the way. I think the things that are totally within our mind are just as real, if not more so. Sometimes I get in trouble with psychiatrists sometimes when they hear me saying that. But I think that we may be dealing with all sorts of real worlds that are around us. I think particularly of a case in England where, and there are many cases like this in our files, where a man suddenly left his house in his little neighborhood outside London, and he drove his car to the end of the street, took a right, and was in a totally different area from which his experience told him he should be. And he was lost in this strange village or neighborhood for the better part of a day. His family at home didn't know where he was. They called the police. They couldn't find him. Although where he was, he stopped the car, and some policemen in strange uniforms stopped him and wanted to see his registration because it didn't match anything that it should have in whatever world he was in. So this does happen all the time. And you wonder about the dream state. How many times when we're dreaming, we're actually visiting other worlds? I wonder when people are picking up sometimes things like electronic voice phenomena, EVPs, if they're not talking to people who are in the dream state in their worlds. All these things are possible. But as far as this missing time, it is a very common thing. People sometimes would attribute it to alien abduction. I just can't really answer from what information you've given me here. And as a matter of fact, you did leave your email address, and I think I will write and ask for more information. But we certainly will keep your name and exact location confidential. And I do thank you for writing. It's very interesting that you ended up in a different place, your lake house you mentioned, and you were in the same clothes. I would like to know a number of things, such as the reaction of your family and things of this kind. So I will be in touch on this. Thank you for writing. Very interesting case. And I'm afraid now we're pretty much out of time. We're going to have to wrap up.
Yeah.
So take it away here, Ben.
All right, so don't miss our New England Drive Time show in the Boston, Worcester, Providence Triangle on WOON 1240 AM and onworldwide.com. Tomorrow at 6 p.m. Eastern, holiday or not, we'll be live.
All right. Also, want to tell you our good friend Phil Imbrogno, who we mentioned earlier in the show, will be speaking in Waterbury, Connecticut, if you can get there. That'll be at the Silas Bronson Library Auditorium on Saturday, October 23rd, 2010. And it's about UFOs, a history of sightings in Connecticut and New York. That might not sound too exciting, but there have been some very interesting and mass sightings, some of which are going on right now in Connecticut and New York. So take that in if you can. And certainly...
All right, so don't forget about our free podcasts, and we'll see you next week. Saturday.
Oh, wait a minute. There's one thing I wanted to get in here, too. Don't forget the annual Mothman Festival at Point Pleasant. We wanted to mention that. Point Pleasant, West Virginia. Yep, Saturday and Sunday, September 18th and 19th. Mothman tours, great food, interesting vendors.
And exhibits. And don't forget our podcast, as I mentioned, at our website, www.behindtheparanormal.com.
Yeah, and just on that Mothman, that's mothmanlives.com for details. We'll get organized. So many thanks to our producer, Will Kosnick. We'll see you right here next Sunday, September 12th, 7 p.m. Eastern, 4 Pacific, CBS New Sky Radio, newskyradio.com, and we'll welcome author and researcher Nigel Kerner to talk about his new book and about the idea of what are greys, referring to the most common form of aliens encountered by witnesses. Are they, in fact, parasites? And... all right, well, we're going to leave you with our quote. I guess it's a long one. This is...
Why do you always choose long quotes?
I don't know. Actually, I think we're gonna save it for next week. They're not always long.
Well, the last two are pretty long.
They're always long at the end of the show
well,
when we have to
do it anyway.
All right. Regarding the air raid over Los Angeles, this is General George C. Marshall to President Franklin Roosevelt. Regarding the air raid over Los Angeles, it was learned by Army G2 that Rear Admiral Anderson, recovered an unidentified airplane off the coast of California with no bearing on conventional explanation. This headquarters has come to the determination that the mystery airplanes are in fact not earthly, and according to secret intelligence sources, they are in all probability of interplanetary origin, unquote.
We'll see you next week.